Hello, everybody. Today we're welcoming back Paul Backlund, an associate marriage and family therapist, also a very good friend. Paul, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
And we're discussing the very popular acronym ENM. And what does that mean to relationships?
It's interesting. I always think of ENM like, that Myers-Briggs, like what personality type are you? EFIG, which I kind of don't really constrict to, but like it's interesting. So it's like a horoscope. Like I'm an IMFT, but like it does like what does that mean? So yeah, ENF, ENM, ENM, ENM. What does ENM mean? What does it mean to you?
Well, it's funny because, as you know, I just started trying out this online dating world, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and she kept saying, like, all these guys have E&M on their profiles. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, what is that? I don't know what that means. So she kind of like opened my eyes to that, and she's like, oh, it's ethically non-monogamous.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second question was, what does that mean?
What when you heard it, what did it mean?
Well, to me, what she explained to me was that there are people who are what they consider ethically non-monogamous. So
Okay.
to me, that means, I mean, I just repeated what the acronym meant, but to me is
Sure.
confusing because ethics is different for everyone. What
Sure.
I think it's ethical might not be what's ethical to you. So if I'm promoting myself as someone who is trying to be honest about not being monogamous, but instead of saying I am honestly non-monogamous, you're saying ethically, then to
Right.
me that really becomes a question. Well, how do I know we have the same ethics?
Right. Right. And you bring up a really good point too, because I think the biggest thing being ethically non-monogamous, and they're wanting to change it, or it's interchangeable between consensual non-monogamy, because then there's a different conversation. But the term itself means it's an umbrella term for a relationship in which all partners give consent, explicit consent, to engage in a romantic, intimate, or a sexual engagement with multiple partners, right? So the biggest word in there that comes in is consent, right? So ethically, when we come to ethics, I think you bring up a good point. It's not necessarily your ethics is different than mine, but at the same time, we have an agreement of what that ethic means. Meaning, again, when ethics come to term, it's like the opposite of that is infidelity, right? Like, I'm going to cheat on you. We have an agreement that we are going to do A, B, and C in our relationship. And if you break that, right, you break that contract that we have, we're no longer ethical. We've had our agreement and now it's broken. So I think when it comes, I think, and that's why consensual is kind of used more often interchangeably with it, because the ethics word is so it's so uh clinical, right? Like it's like I don't like using that word specifically, so I use more the consensual. But it's an umbrella term. So, and also too, it's like what's the opposite of ethical non-monogamy or ethical non-monogamous relationships is what? Just a traditional relationship, right? What do we call that? Like how is that structured? Let me ask you this, like what how is society viewed and changed our perspectives of what a relationship should be. Like when to you, what does a relationship mean?
That's a interesting question because I find myself to be a traditionalist. I feel like
Sure.
I am more traditional than most of my friends.
Yeah.
And I really think that's because of my, upbringing in a country like Brazil that's still incredibly patriarchal and
Sure.
who is culturally Catholic.
Right.
So I think a lot of that was handed down to me through my culture.
Mm-hmm.
So I still want it's the traditional, couple, marriage, kids kind of relationship. But I also say traditional with a spin, right? Like I don't
Sure.
want to be a stay-at-home wife. I had an opportunity to do that in the past and that wasn't for me.
Sure.
I also don't expect my, husband or father of my kids to not engage with the kids in their emotional life and
Sure.
when it comes to their upbringing and teaching them values. I feel like those were things that in my upbringing, my father was the head of the household. His word kind of ruled. He was a tyrant of a type, which is
Sure.
not something that I want for my life and my, chosen family.
Mm-hmm.
But the traditionalism of, a monogamy, a couple and kids, it's really is still what I want. But as I'm really navigating this new world, I have a lot of friends who are in open relationships, a lot of friends who partake in other what are some of those other titles that I always forget, like when you have multiple partners.
Oh, we'll get into that, right? But like,
Okay.
but you bring up a really good point in the societal and the cultural framework of how we view or what is impressed upon us growing up of what a relationship should be, right? Like the traditionalism, I really stems from religion, like the institutions that we have, like it's a man and a woman, death do us part, all these things that are bestowed on us about it's a one-on-one, there's nothing else, right? And you know how the time and times are, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you graduated high school, you got married right away, you had a baby, right? There
Right.
was standards that we had to hit. And if you didn't hit those standards, you were marginalized, or what's wrong with Betsy, or he does, and or if a guy didn't have a relationship with a woman, it's questionably, is he gay or does he like all these things, right? So they're outside the norm, whatever that may look like, right? So these
Yeah.
marginalized communities, and then let's enter the LGBT community, right? Right, where religion and everything says like, no, 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 you can't have that. That is not even granted to you. So they're like, what are we supposed to have? Let us know we have two men, which are, hormone, quote unquote, driven men that are promiscuous and all they think about is sex, and right, all this societal jargon that we come to think with us is like, oh my God, how is this going to happen? So kind of thinking in the terms of that, but like we have other societal things I just kind of want to mention too, that like, for instance, as an everyday thing, these are tacit things that we take for granted. Like, when when a woman comes through the door and a man holds it open, right? That is something
Yeah,
that
I
is
love that.
right. Well, of course you do. I mean, we all of that. Being a man too, it's out of respect too. At the same time, the social awkwardness of like things that you're supposed to do and not supposed to do. Like, and I'm talking about what society views us as normal, right? Like, one thing I always laugh at is like when you walk into an elevator, you face the front and you don't say anything. It's this quiet zone, right? Well, breaking that norm. Have you ever like walked into an elevator and faced everyone else? It's awkward.
Right. I mean, that's a good point. I don't think about that so much. I think since COVID, I haven't been in a lot of elevators, but it's an
Right.
interesting thought. Yeah, we usually go in and we face front.
Right. But we do this unconsciously, right? We do that unconsciously, or, things that go back into the relationship standpoint when you have a heterosexual couple, man and female, and they go out to a date, the man typically is expected, right? We have the societal expectations that the man pays for the dinner, right? So there
Absolutely.
we have these, oh, and I know you love that. We have these norms.
I love gentlemen. I love flowers. I love
And
surprises.
so do I. So do
There
I.
you
That's our
go.
love. Those are love languages, right? But
But
we
I
have
like
these
to make it clear too, although we love those things, we're very good at doing those things for our partners.
100%. But the thing that comes in with the E&M is there's three things that really come into part. There's communication, consideration, collaboration, and consent. And I said three, and I really meant four, right?
Four C's. I love that.
Four
Can you
C's.
repeat the four C's?
Sure. Communication, consideration, consent, and collaboration,
Wow,
right?
that's really
So, and just think about just in your personal values of what is a relationship. Like, what do you value in a relationship? You specifically, what do you value in a relationship?
It's interesting because thinking about this E&M and my last relationship, and what ethics means. And I think I chose that person because he also felt like, as an immigrant like me, as somebody who embodied both traditionalism, but this new age way of living. And
Right,
I thought, oh, maybe I found someone that has the same values and the same um, idea what the future looks like as me.
right,
And things that I value the most are like honesty and directness and caring, like
mhm,
somebody who's caring. And I mean, I'm Brazilian, I'm very touchy-feely, like I love that.
right,
And the little actions of the little things, that's really something that for all of us really makes us feel loved and special.
right,
And this last person did that. He
right.
did the little things, he did show up in little ways, but he failed to do the big things.
Which was
I think our relationship really broke when this one night we were having a great night and we were cuddling on the couch, and I had never remembered being this happy.
mm,
And I looked at him and he said, "You had something you want to say?" And I said, "No, I'm fine." And he's like, "No, I know you want to say something." And I looked at him and I said, "I think I love you." And he freaked out. He got off the couch. He physically pulled away from me and said, "Love is a big word."
right,
Now, what he didn't know at the time, and I was so hurt to say it, is that the night before, when we were falling asleep, he had held me and said, "I love you." And I said, "I'm sorry, what now?"
right,
He said it again. And I remember thinking, oh my God. And I didn't want to say it back in that moment because we'd been drinking
right,
and he was very drunk.
right.
And I was also drunk, but I don't think I was blackout. Don't remember what I said the day before drunk, obviously. So the next day when we were together, I thought, yeah, he's right. I do want to say something. And I was holding on to it all day. And then he felt like a slap in the face. Like he felt like, and I understand now, looking back, I feel like people don't have to say I love you when you're ready to say I love you.
Sure.
And I didn't know how to articulate that because I was very hurt. And he didn't know how to articulate that because I think, and this is just me guessing, he was scared.
Right. Or
Um,
not emotionally available at that point,
or
right?
or he didn't feel it. I don't know. I
Sure.
feel like he could have said to me, and this is where the ethics comes into place. What does that word mean? He could have said anything. I'm
Right,
not ready to say it. I care about you, but I'm not there yet.
right,
I'm too afraid to say it. Months later, when we were having a big fight, he actually blurted out and said, "Of course I loved you." And
right.
I was like, well, then why couldn't you say anything? You could have literally said anything.
But and I want to pause you there because you bring up a really good point. Like the reparative moment in that with him could have been, effective communication, right? How do we articulate our words of him being scared? Because that could have been a very um, authentic place of vulnerability, right? To say someone, and we don't know the past relationships he had and when that happened, right? Or his, the transgenerational trauma that he could have had with his
Yeah.
parents, right? In what love means in a cultural setting or in a hurt setting from his previous relation. That could be a trauma response too, right? You loved me, but then you cheated on me. So, him saying that rather than slowing down. And I think this boils down to 2 points in E&M. I'm going into these acronyms again. In ethical non-monogamy is the basis and the backbone of it, right? I think it's effective communication, collaboration, and vulnerability,
Mhm.
right? I think, and that's the term. So then we can get into the different types of, so off of the top, like, since that's really an umbrella term, what do you think falls under, and we can name a couple, but like when you think that ethical non-monogamy, what comes to mind? What type of relation? You said polyamory, so that's one of them.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for.
That's so, and then we can go down to the terms, but what other terms come to mind to you, just in layman, like what you've heard of or what you've experienced or through your friends?
Yeah, since also like looking at the apps, I see people saying I'm in a committed relationship, just looking for fun things on the side,
Sure.
which I totally get some people are into, but that's really not my thing. So it just opened my eyes to that in general. So
Right.
I expected to be either a couple who are committed to each other and they're
So,
open to outside experiences,
so
or
open relationships.
and then open relationships, or like the polyamory idea, which is a bit more complicated as I understand it, because you have multiple relationships that you're committed to at the same time.
So that's a different one. Okay. Then we have, I'm just kind of, we have casual sex is actually an ENF because literally you're having consensual sex with other people without commitment, right?
Yeah.
So
And you can say that right at the top and say, I just want something casual for sure, which is also something I failed at. I've tried to have a one night stand 3 times in my life and I failed every time. So
right.
it never
But
happened.
your intent of a relationship is different, right? So because you're looking for the one for whatever values and reasons that you want. But as you casual sex is I'm gonna start saying ethical non-monogamy. I'm so dyslexic, it's not even funny. I'm like ENF, FME. I'm just not gonna do it anymore. Then we have threesomes, three ways, right? Then we have monogamish. So we could be in a
What is
relationship.
monogamish?
Monogamish is kind of the sense of like we're in a monogamish, we're in a monogamy. But you know, if we look at someone when we're in Paris together and they tickle both of our feathers and then we agree on it, that we could say, hey, come in, have a good time, and that's it, right? It's kind of like a little treat in the candy store, but we're leaving the store afterwards, right? We're not buying multiple pieces or taking the batch home, right? So it's just a little taste.
You know,
So
as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing maybe what I fall in love with is not people, but like the idea or the ideal relationship. Because, I feel like if I had a partner who had said to me, what do you think about that person? Should we invite him or her in? I'd be like, no.
right.
Like, I want this to be the two of us. But maybe that's the idea that I was raised with or saw in so many Disney movies, that what a relationship that is ideal should look like.
And you bring up such a beautiful point, because I think, you know, the social construct of what a relationship should be, that was why I asked that question in the beginning of how did this term, or how should you be in a relationship, come into play, right? So think about like the marginalized communities, when you couldn't say like you can't be in a relationship, or if there was two men that was like, oh, I don't have that Disney story because Princess Leia is not my type because I don't like her, but Luke is. So what am I supposed to do in that sense, right? So, you know, going back to oh, let me finish on the other ones too, because there's a couple just, so we have polyamory, swinging, right?
Okay.
Swinging is a big one. Open relationships, casual sex, monogamous, and there's a different one. Then you get more into the sexual kind of essence of it. You got, you know, BDSM that has other people playing into it, and then you have this term called cuckolding, which is which you might be, this could be a different situation and scenario, but it goes more into a sexual being where someone comes in to watch another partner have sex. But again, the biggest thing with all of these is consent, consideration, and communication, right? We agree upon this, that this is going to happen and this is okay, right? And I think that's the biggest backbone for ethical non-monogamy, is trust, right?
Right.
Is communication, is thing. And that's why they want to use the word ethics, because the opposite of that is you're being unethical, meaning you're cheating on me, right? So that's something the agreement that we had didn't happen, right? You broke that agreement.
So here's a question for you. So let's say, for instance, like my last relationship, we had a conversation about not seeing other people.
Sure.
Should we, at the end of the same relationship, a conversation happen that now says that agreement is done? Or can it be ethically something that one partner has decided and the other one is going to like agree upon? Because I feel like that was the part of my last relationship that, sorry,
Sure.
Spike is barking.
That's okay. We
One
love that.
second. Let me try again. So let me ask you this question.
Sure.
For example, in my last relationship, when we decided to not see other people, we had the conversation like, hey, we're not boyfriend and girlfriend,
Right.
but we're not seeing other people.
Right.
And so then a lot of things happened that really damaged the relationship on both ends. And I think at some point he just exited the relationship without telling me.
You said you weren't boyfriends, but you're not going to see other people.
Right.
So what would you call that?
I don't know, but I do know it's something I'll never do again.
Okay.
Because what that did to me was generate a lot of confusion.
I'm confused.
Yes. So if that ever happens to me again and somebody says, let's not see other people, but we're not calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend yet,
Well,
I
okay.
would just say, no, thank you. Let's keep seeing other people. And when we're ready to commit to each other, we'll get to that point.
Well, I mean, let's just, the only basis of that agreement per se is like just non-label. I don't want to be your boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whatever it may be. But the agreement, I think the baseline of that is the most important part, is we're not going to see other people.
Sure.
So I'm a creature of curiosity. Does that mean see other people, meaning date, have sex with, look at, like, right?
Yeah.
So it
What
would,
does that mean again?
Well, I think that's the effective communication part of it. It's just like, okay, I understand that, but I'm a little confused, right? Like if you're not going to see any, so like I have a personal friend that has an open relationship agreed upon both partners, and their one line is like, you can have sex with them, you just can't bring them to coffee,
Got
right? So you can go have fun. You want to talk about it? You can with me, but you can great, but nothing beyond that, right? Because that establishes a relationship, that establishes connection rather than just a sexual experience that was had. You know what I
right.
mean? So, but that's their agreement. And that I think the beauty of consensual non-monogamy, ethical non-monogamy, is that there's two people that go beyond traditionalism, right? Go beyond this like you and me one-on-one, all this stuff, and say, what makes you happy? What makes me happy? What can we do this happiness together and meet both ways? And here's the thing, relationships, as we know, always change. So I know many patients that I have that started off monogamy, and then as we know, the more you get longer in a relationship, things change, ideas change, life change, sexual habits change, fetishes, any of these things. And then that's what happens when there's not that effective communication. That's when the cheating comes in, right? Because they don't want to tell their partner who has this strong value and belief, like it's only us, but like I'm actually into leather, or I'm actually into being dominated, or I'm actually into this other person, but you're still my primary partner. There's no communication. So they do it on the side, right? So if I have and I think one word too, another C we can add to this, I think is courage,
Oh my
right?
goodness.
Having the courage to say, honey, babe, sweetie, partner, that, this is something I've been thinking about, being vulnerable with them and saying, I would like to introduce this. What do you think?
Right.
Right? You can't fault someone for them not knowing, right? But you can fault someone for doing something, the action, without telling someone else.
Right. And
Right?
that's kind of how the relationship demised, because I kept the dating app on my phone, even though I never really engaged until this year. Um,
Sure.
but that became it. That became the whole reason for the demise of a relationship where I was being untrustworthy. But in reality, I was like, but you not my boyfriend, and I am not seeing someone else. So, I mean, I'm not even chatting with other people. So it was like one of those things that just became, oh, you chose this as a reason to prove yourself right. So, but then like back to it, Ian, the ethical part of this is that I feel like at that point that person exited the relationship without telling me.
Sure.
So the entire time as I was trying to repair, they were moving on to other people
Right.
without telling me,
Right.
which is to me, if maybe they think that's ethical because they changed their minds. And for them, that is ethical, that if they feel betrayed or hurt or justified, they can do whatever they want with what the other see that you said, care or concern for the other person.
Consideration, sure.
Yeah, any kind of consideration and any kind of communication.
So let me ask you this though, throughout the relationship, did you find that you had those four C's in the relationship: effective communication, consideration, consent, and I mean, the courage to say, I'm comfortable with this or not?
I will say up to that I love you situation.
Okay.
When that happened, that night I spent the night and I woke up the next day and he looked at me and he said, "What was wrong?" And I just bawled.
Sure.
Paul, I cried more than I have ever cried. And it was so interesting that he held me and just silently and just like, what is going on?
Right.
And I looked at him and I said, I don't know if I can be with someone who doesn't feel the same way about me.
Right.
And he still didn't say anything. He still didn't address it. Still didn't say, let's talk about it, or I'm not ready to say it, or it's not doesn't mean that I feel it. I need more time. Whatever. Anything. You could have said anything.
But even in that stance, I don't know this person, but like him sharing that vulnerability stance with you at that moment and saying, I don't know, right, of how I'm feeling, or I can't express, or it's not, what can I do to show up in this situation? So, I mean,
Right.
beyond ethical non-monogamy, then we have like compatibility. There's another C,
Right.
right? Of like maybe you guys weren't on the same page to begin with, but you were in the honeymoon phase, sex was good, everything was great, infatuation. And then when you get the baseline back to the backbone of the relationship, you guys really weren't on the same page, right? So this is a monogamy relationship, right? So imagine the complexity of having two or three or four partners
Oh my
in
God,
a
I can't
relationship.
imagine. And
Well,
this is
that's
why people ask me, like, do you ever cheated on anyone? And I'm like, it's so much work to just keep things straight in my head of who is
sure,
who and what's happening that I couldn't. I'm just
sure.
don't have enough of like an organized mind to keep these things straight.
Sure. And again, too, I think that the backbone and the basis of, ethical non-monogamy or consensual is, and a lot of the times too, not a lot of the times, but from my experience is that you usually have a monogamous partnership, and then they have specifically with threesomes or threesomes, they'll introduce another partner in, and there is a collaboration of we both mutually or all three of us want to be in this arrangement. What
Right.
does it look like? And that's no different from how you and someone else met. You just added someone else. Sure, does it get complex, right? Of course. But the basis of it is the continued stream of communication, the continued stream of courage of saying that, being vulnerable. And trust me, you're still going to hit rocks and arguments and pitfalls, but again, it can be handled and worked through. So I think the thing that comes to terms with, you know, ethical non-monogamy and relationships is that there's a stigma with it, right? It goes against traditionalism, right? And I think the conundrum that comes in is the people that have been cheated on in monogamous relationships have a harder grasp, right? In doing it because I couldn't do it or it couldn't happen with one person. How the hell can I manage it with two other people and their possibility of leaving and all these things, right? So it's like it's harder to do that, and it's not faulting or saying anyone doesn't know how to communicate, but it's new. It's Brene Brown had this term called FFT, the fucking first time, right? Like you can't knock it till you tried it, right? There's going to be anxiety and uncertainty about something else, but in personal experience, I have been in an ethical non-monogamous relationship, and it was probably one of the most liberating, freeing, is because there was nothing to hold back.
Mhm.
I was able to be free with my emotions, and I knew, and usually, like in a polyamory relationship, you have a primary partner and then the secondary, right? So the agreement for the most part is that they're the base, and the third person that's brought in is that, until that is all aligned and saying we're all equals per se. But like if you're doing that and saying, okay, and sometimes in polyamory, if you and I in a relationship, I can have a partner and you can have a partner, but we are the foundation. And if something's going on with your partner and I feel uncomfortable and say, Luciana, I'm feeling a lot of jealousy, mistrust, and how this person is disrespecting me, it's our communication. And then it's your decision or our decision to say that relationship has to dissolve. If you're like, no, I'm not leaving this person, now you're kind of breaking our agreement, right? So it is a complex. It's like a triad and all these things, but again, it's reinstating the agreement that we had in the beginning, just like the agreement that you and I would be monogamous, the agreement that we would do this. But if things happen, A, B, and C would fold down.
And I think it's important to mention, as I'm listening to you, that it takes all partners
All partners.
to be involved, to be open and willing, and at least attempting to communicate clearly with each other. Because,
Sure.
in the beginning of that relationship where I felt less emotionally charged, I was able to say things like, are you jealous of this person? When the other person wasn't able to come to me and say, I feel vulnerable because this other person is giving you attention. Why are you communicating with them? And all I got was kind of like silence and stonewalling. And I looked at my person and I thought, wait, are you jealous? Is this what's happening?
Sure.
And he voiced his opinion and said, that's weird and I don't like this interaction. And I was like, okay, I hear you. There's no issue there.
Right.
And it wasn't a problem. So it wasn't until I felt too vulnerable
Sure.
that I was no longer able to open that communication door consistently.
Right.
So that's when you need your other partner to be willing to step in when you can't. So
Sure.
there's got to be that.
Right.
But being advocate, the devil's advocate, I can only speak for the work that I need to do. And I definitely had a lot of communication issues that I needed to work on, which I have in the last year.
And
Yeah.
and and I and you bring up a really good point too, in the sense of, and a lot of the time there's a lot of growth and understanding amongst oneself, but too, like if you have insecurities, jealousy, past history, emotional trauma, and then you were like, I want to give it a try. I mean, talk to your therapist, and that's always a good thing. But understand the relationship with these things. Understand your relationship with jealousy and understanding of, because now it's twofold, right? So I think, and I think too, some of the people that I have met that have been in consensual non-monogamy are really, really good at communication, are really good at vulnerability, more than other people in this traditional one-on-one kind of setting, because they're able to be like, no, I'm not okay with that. Boundaries is a huge thing, right? And specifically, if I've said something that's making me uncomfortable and it's happened multiple times, now me and my primary partner have a problem, right? Like, so it's the complexity is there, but it takes certain type of people to do it. Not everyone can do it. So, but it's all on the intent of it. But again, too, the 3 C's or the 4 C's: communication, consideration, consent, and what I really like is courage.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about communication as a courageous act, but I think we're all so afraid to lose. We all want to be
Sure.
loved. And when you really want someone because you care about them and you want the relationship to work, I think that's when it fails, when you start to try to silence yourself
Right.
because you're afraid that they're going to leave. When in reality, the relationship started because you liked each other the way you were. And the
Right.
moment you start to edit yourself, I think that's when things go awry.
Right.
After I told that person I loved him, I saw a significant change in his behavior.
Right.
It was almost like he was acting up in very childish ways to prove to himself whether or not I did love him, if I could withstand those things. And I didn't realize that at the time. But looking back again, when you do that work, what I learned recently is like in my next relationship, there's 3 things that I think are very important. And number one is asking myself, do I enjoy your personality? Are you someone that I feel like I have fun with and I want to continuously to have fun with,
So
for potential?
compatibility.
Yeah, compatibility.
Right.
2, what are your values?
Mhm.
I think in the past I got so stuck in, oh my God, we like the same food and we work in the similar business and we're both creative and we come from similar backgrounds and I think that the things we like in common doesn't necessarily mean compatibility.
Sure.
And the third one, which I think it's a really big one for me that I really learned in my last relationship is, do I want to help you succeed? And do you want me to help me succeed?
So making the person a better person, like,
Yeah.
sure.
Do I want to be your partner on your quest to whatever it is you want to be doing in this life? And
Okay.
are you doing that for me? I
Sure.
feel like we went on so many, beautiful dates and we had a great time and we enjoyed each other's companies, but were we building each other up? Were we
Mhm.
helping each other be better, learn more? And I think that has that consideration aspect that you mentioned.
Sure.
Because if I am looking at another person and thinking, how can I help you be better in any way, even if it's just communication, then before I react, then if I have that in my mind, maybe I'll react differently.
But but those are, and that's, but the thing, the alignment of those values are conversations that you have in the beginning, right?
Right.
And again, just with, like I was saying in the beginning, where monogamy relationships kind of turn into that, sometimes values change, right? But I think it's that constant stream, that constant collaboration of things that are important to you. Like I'm a big fan of checking in, right? Checking in, just saying, of not what you're doing and how you're doing, but what can I do, right? Rather than reading that mind. Because you could have a global check-in of like, I see you're watching some, three-way porn? Is there something that you want to discuss, right? Or because sometimes we don't have that. So it's just that constant checking in, and I think is important, but that goes back into the collaboration and the communication beyond the values, right? Because the values were aligned, but sometimes people cheat when they still align on the same values, right? There's other instances that come up. It's not easy, and it's not for everyone, but it's full. And like there's a saying in the BDSM community, it says you can't yuck someone's yum, right? If someone else, well, if we're together and I'm interested in foot play, and you're like, oh my God, that's so gross. To me, that's like, wow, that really turns me on, and it's something that is important. But now my partner thinks it's gross, and so that's like, so I have a defensive stance on that. Like now I'm not gonna be open and expressive and vulnerable to my partner of what else I like. Another effective communication way to say that is like, huh, never really tried that. What is it that you like about foot play? Right? Like, what is it? I find feet a very strong sense of walking. I mean, whatever the term could be, right? And then it's just like, oh, okay, I haven't done it, but like, what did you have in mind? Right? There's that collaboration and conversation. But a lot of people in society automatically stigmatize ethical non relationships or monogamy existences because it's not part of what they believe in or what they find normal, right? We have this sense, we live in a cisgender heterosexual society, right? We have one way of living, we have one way of acting, and it's just like everything else is to the wind, right? But whatever, again, brings you happiness, exploring, enticing, all of that, right? But that's a contract, an agreement between me and you.
Right.
I really don't care what Billy Sue Gina says about what we have because we're happy, right? So it's taking that micro view rather than that micro perspective of what other people think.
Would you say then that all your relationships are as healthy as your ability to communicate?
Hell no. I mean, it's been a journey for me. Both of my parents I lost in addiction, so I wasn't really taught and mirrored what boundaries are, how to effectively communicate. So a lot of mine was trial and error. Like I had to be in really abusive, substance-ridden relationships to find out, like, and a lot of therapy to say, what is important to me? What are my values? What are my, and it was a point when I took a year off to say, this is what Paul wants. This is what Paul appreciates. This is what Paul values, and work on myself, kind of like what you were saying, in understanding my demons, my past trauma, and putting it out there. We call it mate selection, right? There's a term that we use, is called multi-generational transmission, where the trauma that we have, we're comfortable with, right? My father was an alcoholic, so a lot of my partners happened to be alcoholics because I was comfortable in the chaos. I knew how to manage them, right? So repetition compulsion, we go to these things that we're comfortable with, even though that they're unhealthy, right? So I had to find my basis, my meaning, through effective communication, through vulnerability, through the ability to say, no, I'm not okay with that, right? So it's a journey for all of us, but we don't have to do it alone. There's a lot of groups, there's a lot of support groups, there's a lot of therapy groups. I think what you're doing here, just having the conversation, is beautiful. I mean, I love your podcast because you cover so many fields and so many interests that it's just like, and things that aren't really talked about, right? And just identifying it, and then where do I fit into this, and if it's interested in me. So yeah, I think the work that you're doing in this quest for love, in this exploration of understanding yourself too, right? I think this is something you did, is beautiful for everyone listening.
Yeah,
And
that's how the podcast idea started, was that in the aftermath of that relationship where I was seen like a dishonest person, and honesty is so important to me. I
Mhm.
really stopped to think about, like, in what ways have I been dishonest in this relationship? And I
Sure.
realized that I was, but it wasn't in going outside the relationship. It was into not being honest about my feelings and my needs and the things that I wanted and how to communicate those. And I didn't know how. So I started this podcast and this conversation because I realized there's a lot of people like me who are struggling not only with just sharing and being vulnerable, but also identifying what those feelings are.
Mhm.
Last time I saw you, I had the feelings wheel on my phone because
Mhm.
growing up, my parents didn't say, "You're mad about what? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is resentment? Is it hurt? Why are you mad? How is this, you know, happening for you?" The same thing with the last relationship. I'm like, he was angry all the time. And once I became angry based on his actions, I realized, oh, he wasn't angry. He was hurt this whole time.
Sure.
He was hurt because
Right.
my anger was hurt,
Right.
and until I was able to spill all that out in a very interesting way, but that I found some peace, which was like, oh, I guess this pain was just hurt.
Mhm.
So this podcast started with an effort to be open, honest, and vulnerable and put your shit out there. And when I started, people were like, "Oh my God, everybody's gonna know your shit." And I'm like, but that's the point.
Mhm.
you know? And it's
Mhm.
still a challenge. And some days I release an episode and I think, oh God, that was so personal.
Right.
But I know those are the most powerful ones, and I hope people will relate.
And one of my values and beliefs is transparency, right? I think that not only takes courageous, but that also shows a lot of personal accountability and responsibility. No one's perfect. Yes, I messed up. Apology, forgiveness. But I think the second part or the third part of forgiveness is, what am I going to do that's different? Right? Because a lot of the time, the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So we go into these relationships, and I see it in my practice every day, and I see patterns.
Mhm.
And on a third party basis, they don't see it. They're like, oh, it's his fault. He's not communicating. He's not that. But at the end, it's like it's joining that accountability of, well, you're going through every single partner's phone. What are you looking for? Right? Like, because that person has an unhealthy relationship with trust and every single thing. So what does trust look like to you? How do we rebuild your trust with yourself, hold boundaries and say, I'm okay or I'm not okay with this, right? And it's now their responsibility, the partner, to say, I respect and love this person. I will do what they say, or I will try my hardest,
Right.
rather than showing up with anger or showing up with frustration or silence, right? When we silence ourselves, we sacrifice ourselves, right? We sacrifice a piece of us. And that's when the communication dies. That's when the collaboration dies. That's when the courage is not even there. And the consideration is that I'm not asking you because I want you to prove it to me how much you love me or care for me, right? So that's a whole different conversation. That's a whole different podcast. Like that's something we could get into much longer. But again, too, I think the basis of it is communication, collaboration, and a new word is that transparency. And again, that's what I love about this is your transparency and vulnerability in your story to help others, right? Understand that, because just like in addiction that I do part-time in, it's like there is a shared community and you don't have to do this together, but we can live through it together to see what can I learn through Luciana in my journey for a quest to find a partner.
Wow. I think that's the right place to end this conversation today.
Right.
Paul, this has been so enlightening, but also more than about ethnically non-monogamous relationships, a conversation where we can walk away with some tangible things that are going to help us in every relationship going forward. So thank you for coming back and being with us today.
My pleasure. The pleasure is all mine, and I can't wait to come back.
More to come.
Alrighty. Thank you, sweetie.
Thank you.